Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the 5 greatest Schoenberg conductors. Now, one of you had suggested that I make a list of Second Viennese School and sort of lump them all together, but I didn't want to do that because they're really very different composers, and they require different levels of skill, and I couldn't find 5 conductors who fit all 3 of them equally well. So, we're doing it one at a time. We may not get to Bergen-Weber, I don't know. But certainly Schoenberg deserves a list of his own. And one of the interesting things about doing Schoenberg, of course, is that his style changed so hugely over his lifetime. And even after he evolved what you think would be his mature 12-tone method, he never repeated himself. Ever. So, different conductors excel at different aspects of his style. And so finding sort of all-around Schoenbergers was kind of an interesting challenge. And I think I've come up with a pretty good list, and I'm very interested to get yours as well. Here they go. Are you ready? First, Hans Rosbaud. Without a doubt. I mean, Rosbaud was just a genius conductor, first of all. He had a not very good radio orchestra after the Second World War, and he made amazing recordings with that orchestra. He really did. There was something in Rosbaud that even when the orchestra playing isn't great or the sound wasn't fabulous, he just communicated what the music was doing. And that is an incredible gift. It really is. He had a feeling for shape, for the long line of the music. And Schoenberg is not an easy guy to do that way, but Rosbaud knew how to do it. So good for him. Absolutely fabulous for him. His recordings are amazing generally. So I just want to throw that out there. Number 2, Robert Kraft. He doesn't get much attention as a conductor. He really wasn't a conductor, actually. He was Stravinsky's amanuensis, whatever you call that person who, follows you all over the place and writes down everything you say or whatever and helps you out with stuff. But Robert Kraft, before he met Stravinsky, was a sort of hardcore avant-garde Second Viennese School guy. I mean, he introduced Stravinsky to the 12-tone method, and he also was a specialist at Gesualdo and early music. He had very, very interesting musical tastes. And of all the Schoenberg conductors, he was probably the most accurate. He was able to do make some remarkable recordings, mostly for Naxos, and they are pretty splendid. He wasn't so good at the earlier Schoenberg stuff, like Girl-Leader, the romantic stuff. That wasn't his personality at all. But the other things, wow, he was pretty amazing. And I mean, he has one of the most incredible recordings of Schoenberg's violin concerto, which is actually listenable and enjoyable. I was really impressed by his Schoenberg recordings on Naxos, and I think you'd be too. And they're out there, and wow, the guy deserves props for being a really dedicated advocate of that music and for taking it really seriously and making sure it got played as effectively as possible, letting us really hear what Schoenberg wrote. Wonderful stuff. Then Giuseppe Sinopoli. He's sort of the opposite of Robert Kraft. It's interesting. Actually, he was good at the late stuff too, but Sinopoli was a generalist conductor. That is, few conductors were able to capture this hothouse flower fin de siècle decadence the way Sinopoli was. He wasn't a micromanager. He didn't always get the most accurate playing, but he made some Schoenberg recordings with the Staatskapelle Dresden, which is always a joy to hear, whatever they're playing. And they're from Girl-Leader all the way up to the Begleitungsmusik zur meinen Lichtspielszene, the accompaniment to a cinematographic scene and other things. And he did the Chamber Symphony, and he did all kinds of other stuff. So it's, Erwartung, and yeah, really, really some interesting interpretations. And although they are sort of variable from a technical point of view, he did have that atmosphere. He just caught that sense of panic that suffuses Schoenberg's music really, really well. So he's definitely on my list. And of course, you got to do Michael Gielen. Michael Gielen was the natural successor to Hans Rosbaud in many ways. He was a fantastic conductor. He had a very different worldview. I think, he believed that, the world was disgusting and, everything is evil and that, the only legitimate music was the kind that expressed, ugliness and despair. But if that's going to be your attitude, then Schoenberg's your guy or one of your guys. And Gielen was another composer who really was a composer too, by the way, just horrible composer. Wrote awful, terrible music. But he was a wonderful exponent of the Second Viennese School. I mean, he was really steeped in the idiom, and he knew exactly what it was about and how to communicate it through the orchestra. And he made a bunch of really fine recordings of Schoenberg's music. So that definitely, for German radio, unfortunately, SWR mostly, unfortunately, those recordings are hard to find now. They made beautiful boxes. They were all designed, Rosbaud, the Gielen editions by my good friend in Munich, Sörenmeyer Eller. He put them all together. He annotated them fabulously. They were wonderful, wonderful, wonderful sets, and they just disappeared, poof, like smoke. But Gielen also did Moses and Aaron quite well. He did the piano concerto a couple of times, fabulously, with the chamber symphonies. I mean, there's stuff on major labels too with Gielen, so you may be able to get your hands on some of the best stuff. And finally, last but not least, I mean, we cannot talk about Schoenberg without Pierre Boulez. Now, Boulez is a very interesting case because Boulez did a lot of Schoenberg twice. And there's a big box on Sony of all of his Schoenberg recordings, and then he remade a lot of it for Deutsche Grammophon. The interesting thing about Boulez is that when he first came out, I mean, with all of his Schoenberg, most of it was with the BBC Symphony. It was not the best playing, and he wasn't the best conductor, but he was, as they say, the French correction. I mean, he would stay at it till they got it right. But by and large, Boulez's first Schoenberg has the sense of discovery and a certain amount of spontaneity, which is not a Boulezian quality, generally speaking. But it was for these things because the music was atrociously difficult and they were all playing it for the first time. And so there is that element to it, a certain freshness. His later recordings are more disciplined because the orchestras got better and Boulez got better and a little slower and a little mellower too, I think. I mean, and Schoenberg, for all of his gnarliness, does actually care about expression. And so we have the opportunity to make the comparisons. His dedication to Schoenberg was absolute, and he was, of course, a very, very great musician. So, you can't complain too much. He wasn't like slovenly, but there really is a difference. And his earlier Schoenberg got a lot of acclaim because for most of us, it was the only show in town. So, beggars couldn't be choosers. And that's where he acquired his reputation. But I think that in the great scheme of things, Kraft and Gielen were more accurate Schoenberg conductors than Boulez was, or Boulez became one of them later on. And his earlier stuff is interesting. It's interesting to hear as a sort of first in-depth exploration of this body of music that was completely unknown to just about everybody at the time that those recordings were made. So those are my 5. If you have your 5, maximum of 5, minimum of 0, feel free to add them at your discretion. So thanks for listening, friends. Keep on listening and take care.